journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. It has been more than 10 years since I was the commander of a counterintelligence unit that governed an entire country in the Middle East. We were responsible for identifying, neutralize, and exploiting espionage and terrorist efforts to hurt U.S. service members and U.S. citizens as well as innocent civilians. I had this incredible team of counterintelligence agents, intelligence analysts, admin and support staff. We had incredible partnerships with the embassy, different counterintelligence organizations throughout the country and back in the United States as well. It was a really crazy time for me. As a female, super tiny, fun-sized, looking like I'm 12 years old and walking into this job wondering what the hell I was doing there. I thought that this job was the cherry on the icing. What mistake had somebody made to send me there? And so for the year that I was the commander of that unit, I didn't sleep. It was super crazy. It was incredible though. Our days were super busy with briefings to base leadership, coordinations with the embassy, and the occasional meeting with a certain three-letter agency. I had 8 bosses at the time between our boss in the Middle East, we had a boss in Europe, we had a boss back in Quantico. It was just a lot. And so even though I thought this was probably the peak of the craziness of my career, my phone rang one day. And it was my boss calling from a few countries over to say, hey, there's this job we want you to apply for. And I'm like, okay, is this weird? It's the military. You guys normally just tell us where to go. And he said, yeah, no, this is a different kind of job. We would like for you to apply to be the senior bodyguard to a team of bodyguards for one of the top Pentagon officials. I'm pretty sure I snorted when he said that. And as I was laughing, I asked him, did you have the right file in front of you? Because surely there must have been a mistake. Now, this boss, we had met before a couple of times, and so he knew what I looked like. But in my head, I legitimately thought that they had made a mistake on telling me that they wanted me to apply for this thing. My boss laughs at me and says, no, yes, we want you to apply. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool, whatever. Honestly, at that point, I thought that I was going to be the fluff package for the package of the person that they actually wanted to get picked. You have to send multiple candidates up, right? And so I thought it was like, oh, like this girl's a candidate, but she's really not. So I send my package up and super long story short, next thing I know, my assignment gets curtailed, which means they shorten the assignment by about 3 or 4 weeks. And I'm on a plane back to the States because I need to be at the Pentagon ASAP to take over this position. And so fast forward, I find myself at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Advanced Personal Security Operations School, which is just a fancy way of saying Advanced Secret Service School. And we're looking around and introducing everybody. I'm the only female there, which already makes me feel more uncomfortable. I'm wondering what the hell I'm doing there because I was the fluff package. On one of the breaks, I somehow make my way to the smoke pit, which, as we all know, is where all the business gets done, is in the smoke pit. And I am completely dumbfounded, and up until this point had been able to contain all of the fear in my head my entire life. I'd never let it pass my lips. But in this moment of complete weakness, I word vomited all over myself. And I asked this instructor, what the hell am I doing here? And he takes this long drag off of his cigarette. I can see his eyes studying me as he exhales and his pot belly exhales all the smoke. And he says, Alani, being a personal security advisor has nothing to do with what you look like or your size or your strength, but it has everything to do with how you use your brain. And so I started this crazy 2-year journey to finally kill and learn to harness my inner imposter syndrome. And so during that time at the Pentagon, we were working crazy hours. I was exhausted because remember, I had come off of a 1-year counterintelligence assignment. And so anytime there's an attack in your area of responsibility, it's my fault. So needless to say, I didn't sleep for that time there. And then I'm in the Pentagon where I'm working even more hours. It was just super nuts. But I knew that I was there for a reason. I didn't know what that reason was, but I knew there was a good one. But I will admit that there were 2 times during my time at the Pentagon where I thought I would literally break from exhaustion. At the time, admittedly, I was still really wobbly in my belief system, super unsure of what I believed in and how I defined things. But ultimately, it wasn't until several years later, I had left active duty. I was working at a nonprofit, which was one of the world's largest anti-slavery organizations. I was responsible for child sex trafficking and child rape cases in the South America area of responsibility. And I get a call from my boss, who is incredible, retired NCIS director, and he tells me, hey, so you might have heard, but some of our staff and a client from our field office in Kenya were murdered by the Kenyan police. That office in particular investigated police corruption. And so the police were hunting down an individual who'd made an allegation of police corruption. And you're one of a couple of people in this organization with former bodyguard experience. Would you mind going to Kenya and doing security operations to and from the office to the courtroom in this international high-profile case? Oh, by the way, we're a nonprofit, so you have no badge, no gun. And I don't have budget because we're a nonprofit, so I'm going to try to get you a bulletproof vest, but I might not be able to. And also, the 6th, I think, suspect involved in the murders was still at large. And actually, we don't even know what their identity is. And so it's possible they might show up and shoot up the place or target you guys a different way. So are you willing to go? And in that moment, I had crystal clarity about the previous 12 years of my career and why I had gone through everything I had gone through. And it had all led me to this moment where I knew in my bones that I was meant to go protect these incredible humans who were fighting corruption and impunity. So hell yeah, I'm going to Kenya to take a bullet for these incredible humans. And thus, I started to understand that my imposter syndrome was something that could be harnessed. Welcome to the very first episode of the Humble Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead. I'm a best-selling author, professional speaker, including my TEDx talk. I'm a leadership coach and founder of Mighty Sparrow Coaching, LLC, a leadership coaching and consultation company. Listen, y'all, never in a billion years did I think that I would ever have a podcast. But I am honestly really excited to use this platform to share the tools that I use with my private, corporate, and government clients through the work that I do every single day. And so this podcast is going to be all about imposter syndrome. What is it? How can you identify it within you? And what are you going to do about it? You want to squash it? You want to harness it? You want to negotiate with it? You want to do something different? And what's wild is whenever I find people who say they don't know what imposter syndrome is, I'm just blown away. But the truth is that a lot of people haven't heard about it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit first about what imposter syndrome is. And it actually was identified initially in the 1970s by these 2 psychotherapists. And I'm going to apologize if I'm saying their name wrong, but Dr. Clance and Dr. Immis. But these women were researchers at a university, and they observed these same behaviors amongst female colleagues, where even though these women were brilliant and smart and very high achievers, they were constantly downplaying, receiving positive feedback. They were feeling like the awards and the positions that they had were undeserved, and that people around them were going to figure out that they were undeserving of these promotions and positive feedback and all those things. So actually at the time, they called it the imposter phenomenon, and they decided to do a study about it. And what they determined through the course of this first study was that about 70% of the study participants, who at the time were only women, experienced this phenomenon. And how it's actually defined is the belief that you are unworthy, incapable of the accolades, awards, job title, promotions, raises, all of the things. And that one day people, whether they're your bosses, your coworkers, are going to figure out that you are unworthy of the title, positions, accolades, awards, promotions, bonuses. And that when you're found out, things will go catastrophic. People might lose respect for you because they finally figured out that you don't deserve to be there. Or you might even lose your job. You could potentially lose your livelihood. You could lose your house. There's this whole crazy rabbit hole that people with imposter phenomenon experience. But ultimately, what it leads to is a bunch of behaviors. So we're looking at overworking. We're looking at perfectionism, right? So I'm constantly needing to overwork, overdo things so that other people can see my value, so that I can prove my inner imposter wrong. They're constantly dismissing positive feedback or praise. So if you're one of those people, when somebody comes up to you and says, man, you did an amazing job with that project, and you say something like, oh, thanks, but I could have done A, B, or C so much better. Or you like to deflect positive feedback and you say, oh, it was really a team effort. So that fake humility, right? Even though you know damn well that you did the majority of the work and you steered this thing and it was your baby, but you are just not able to receive and intake that positive feedback. The fake humility is a big element because society tells us that we should be the kind of person who is super humble and all of the things, but fake humility does not serve you because it doesn't actually acknowledge the incredible work and effort that you poured into the project. People with imposter phenomenon often overprepare and overwork. So if you say things or think things like, I try to be the first one in and the last one out of the office, then you're probably struggling with imposter phenomenon. Imposter phenomenon can also impact our finances in the worst way. And so people who experience this when they are applying for jobs oftentimes will struggle with bringing up the salary conversation or even negotiating what the term should be. They often will undermine their value and their worth and ask for less money because they don't want to be seen as a bother or like they're asking too much or being greedy. And the same thing goes for if you're in a job and you're due for a raise, oftentimes the imposter in you will prevent you from asking for that raise because you don't want to be seen as the kind of person who's all about yourself and bugging people for raises when you should just be sticking your nose down and doing the work, and somebody will eventually recognize your value and give you that raise. And so over time, that lowers our spending power. It lowers the amount of Social Security you potentially might get. It lowers your ability to save and use compound interest to your advantage to make even more money in the market, to have a cushier retirement, to go on those vacations, to support your family and show love to your kids and the people that you care about. And then ultimately, imposter phenomenon results in self-sabotage and burnout. So all this striving and hustling and overworking is going to end up with you being burnt out. And as you've probably already heard, if you are experiencing burnout, then you've actually been experiencing it for a while. It's just your body is finally sending you signals that, hey, it's getting super bad. Maybe we should do something about this. And here is the key takeaway that I want you guys to use after coming and listening to these episodes, which is that even though your imposter syndrome feels super loud in your head all the time and it's really holding you back, often I hear people say they feel very stuck, right? And we just spent all this time talking about all the ways that it hurts you. The truth is that what you think is your weakness, so what your imposter phenomenon is telling you is your weakness, is actually the key to unlocking your greatest superpowers. So I'm going to say that again because it's one of the most important things you're going to take away every time you come listen to an episode of this podcast, is that what you think is your weakness is the key to unlocking your greatest superpower. And so for me, coming out of that story that I shared with you guys at the beginning, my weaknesses were fourfold. I thought I was too female because who has ever really seen a female bodyguard? I know they exist, but they're not really a thing. And who the hell actually wants a female bodyguard? Two, I was too Hispanic. My skin was too brown. Wrong or indifferent, I move through a world that sometimes isn't the friendliest towards me. And I'm always trying to make sure that I'm fitting in with the team. And frankly, I don't fit in these very male dominated Caucasian spaces. Now, there's nothing wrong with being Caucasian or a male. I'm just saying that I'm not that, right? And that's typically what you. And so I felt really inferior as a security advisor because of what I thought my appearance detracted from my ability to do the job. The same thing goes for my youth. So when I tell people that I have been in the military or a special agent for more than 20 years, they are shocked because I look really young for my age. And so oftentimes I had this chip on my shoulder because I felt like people weren't taking me seriously because they were judging me based on how I looked. And then same thing goes for my physical appearance. I'm very petite. I'm 5'3". And again, you wouldn't envision someone being 5'3" as being in the front running to be a senior bodyguard. And so all these things that I thought were actually weaknesses actually gave me an advantage. So that conversation that I had with the trainer, the instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center gave me that tiny little mustard seed of hope that maybe he was right. He was the expert. And so I moved through the next year or so trying to prove my value still because I had some idea of imposter syndrome, but I had no clue how much it ravaged my identity and my life. And so over time, I realized that I actually was good at my job because imposter syndrome helps you be the best control freak ever. And so I can be control freak. I love a good to-do list. And guess what security advising is all about? You're following your checklist. And so what a lot of people don't know about security advising is that most of the work is done before your protectee goes and does what we call the movement. And so they might go give a talk at some university, and we're planning weeks or even months in advance. We're sending agents out to do site surveys. There's a whole list of tactical procedures that we're taking care of. We're doing background checks on individuals potentially. We're doing all kinds of fun stuff on the internet to try to figure out who might potentially be interested in hurting our person. And so before we even set foot in that facility on game day, we've already done the work. And so we have agents on site that have made contact with different folks. And my job when I'm on site with the boss is literally just to scan for threats and take the bullet if I have to, or ideally get the boss out of the way so that they are completely safe. And so imposter phenomenon, I realized had tricked me for a really long time. And that became the undoing of my imposter phenomenon. And now I love to teach people how they can harness their imposter syndrome to work for them. Obviously, it took a little bit of faith for the next couple of years before I got to Kenya and realized that clearly poor people do not get bodyguards. And so I believe in God. That is my spiritual belief system. We will talk about spiritual beliefs and the importance in breaking or harnessing your imposter syndrome and how that spiritual belief system plays into it. But it was in that moment that I realized, oh, I think there is some kind of grand design for me. And I started leaning into it. And we're going to talk about some other examples of people who experience imposter phenomenon. And so one way to harness your weakness and actually turn it into a strength is through the story of Aaron Benzakind, who, if you guys do not have Magnolia Network, you must get it so that you can get this show called Growing Floret. It has been nominated for a bunch of Emmys. It is absolutely fantastic. And you guys, Erin, who's the owner of Floret Farms, she's basically the original flower influencer, completely blew me away because I had no idea what I was missing. I'm a military officer. I'm law enforcement. I'm a little bit more tactical in those spaces like survival and protecting life and investigations. I had no idea how much I needed flowers in my life until I watched this show. And it's all about Erin's journey of basically growing this business, right? They say it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. So she went through a lot of failures with her husband in growing Floret. And it's now this premier floral company. They produce the most beautiful flowers. And they now teach people how they can grow their own. So they're not just about producing the flowers. They actually, from my understanding, don't make flowers anymore, but they produce the seeds that you can buy. And they're actually an education company that teaches people how they can grow flowers and spread love and beauty everywhere they go. And I was absolutely in awe watching this series because Erin has created this incredible empire. But the truth is that Erin is very introverted, like mega introvert. So she actually talks about having a deep fear of being around a lot of people, which is hilarious because she has millions of followers and she's very popular. She has a New York Times best-selling book. I think there are multiple bestsellers actually. And so Erin talked about when they first decided to go into education, they actually were doing these in-person classes and they would have maybe a couple dozen people. And I think she said the first 5 years of the existence of those training programs, they trained about 500 people. And even though she loved sharing the wealth of knowledge that she had accumulated, the truth was that leading up to those events, she would get physically sick, like she couldn't hold food down. She couldn't sleep. She had all this anxiety from having to be around all of these people, but she would muscle through it so that she could go and teach this information that she wanted to get out there. And it wasn't until finally she caved and said, I can't do this anymore. This is out of alignment with who I am as a person. And she went online. And so now, because she made a decision to create her business around her top values, and we're going to talk about that in another episode, is one of the key reasons why we're struggling with imposter syndrome is because we don't actually know what our core values are. And so Erin understood that being introspective, introverted was really core to who she was. And when she went online with her business, it exploded. And now she's taught hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people online. She certainly has inspired millions of people. And she's insulated herself. They don't allow people on their farm, so there are no public visits to this farm anymore. And this is what she does to maintain her energy, but also by honoring that part of her story and harnessing that fear that she had, she's actually been able to educate the world and bring so much beauty. And frankly, as someone who struggled with imposter syndrome, a value like beauty was something I deemed was completely frivolous. I didn't have time for it. I was out here trying to save lives and trying to stop children from being sexually abused and trying to lead people in also doing that work. So the idea of beauty, spending time out in a floral farm or doing anything fun was not a thing for me. I sure as heck also wasn't taking care of myself physically because the mission and the people always came first. I came last. That's what my imposter syndrome constantly was telling me. If you want to be a good leader, you need to put yourself last. And we're going to talk later in the season about why that's a myth too. And so I hope you enjoyed this one tiny example of how you can harness your inner imposter to work for you as well. And I'm going to give plenty of examples through the rest of the season. I'm really excited to have lots of guests on the show who I find really inspiring myself. And I am so excited to share this information with you guys. So through this season, we're going to be identifying the subconscious messages that your imposter syndrome has been running on loop in your brain for years or even decades, which indicate that there's a reason why you're not good enough. We're also going to identify different strategies that you can utilize so that you can either silence that voice or have a different kind of relationship with it, or even harness it, which is a pretty advanced tactic, but it can get super fun when you realize all that's possible to do with your imposter syndrome. And so I'm super excited for this. If you are ready to start on your journey and you can't wait, you can purchase my book, The Least of Us: How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Strength. It's available at all major book retailers, including Amazon. You can check out all the reviews there and on Goodreads as well. Otherwise, you can find me on @MightySparrowCoaching on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook as well. And I love LinkedIn. You can find me at Alani Bankhead. I'm always sharing tidbits and insights and lessons learned. And so in the meantime, remember, humble warriors, that what you think is your weakness is actually the key to unlocking your greatest superpower. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to spending a little bit more time with you. Take care. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI@mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.